Hello and welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. I'm Azra Alagic, your host and founder of Biohack Her. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach specialising in longevity for women, a health and wellness journalist, writer, corporate consultant, and a biohacking advocate. Biohack Her is a space where we can explore ways to optimise our health to live well longer, whether it's through improving our nutrition, exercising, cryotherapy, supplementation, technology, and more. I'll be bringing you information and interviews with the best longevity experts to help you understand what you can do to optimize your health, prevent disease, and slow down or even reverse the symptoms of aging by taking control of your unique bio-individuality. Want to know more? Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Biohack Her podcast. As some of you might know, I'm not only a podcast host, but also an integrative nutritional health coach. As part of my mission to help women live well longer, I'm excited to share that I have launched my first Biohack Her product, my Good Gut Granola. I created this recipe after navigating my own gut health issues and struggled to find healthy breakfast options that didn't taste like cardboard. My cranberry and walnut granola is gluten-free and vegan, and each ingredient has been specifically chosen because of its science-backed ability to support longevity. And I haven't compromised on taste to achieve a healthy granola. But I apologize in advance because once you start eating, you will become addicted. It's that Moorish. It's now available for my Australian listeners, and you can purchase it online from www.biohack-her.com, where you can also download a free copy of my ebook, Biohack Her, Live Well Longer, a beginner's guide to biohacking for women to optimize your health. Now on to today's pod. Today I chat to Chris Burres, the founder and chief scientist at MyVitalC, where he manufactures a Nobel Prize winning molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experiment result in history. He explains how the molecule helps to manage oxidative damage and can help reduce inflammation caused by exercise. Chris is also a published author and the host of the Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity Health Summit, and a podcast host himself. We chat about the Longevity Summit and why he set one up, and so much more. Chris has some great insights into the longevity space, and I'm sure you'll enjoy our chat. Let's jump in. Hey Chris, welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. How are you doing?
Wonderful, Azra. How are you doing?
I'm really well. Excited to have you on the pod today. We met at the biohacking conference in Dallas recently. So I think we connected there and decided that it was a good opportunity to get you on and have a chat. So can you share with us the story behind the discovery of this Nobel Prize winning molecule and its significance in health research?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, great to meet you. Glad we're connecting on the podcast here and excited to share some cool information about a molecule, a longevity molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history. That's a mouthful, but we're going to need some time here in this podcast to kind of go through that. The molecule, and we actually call the molecule ESS60 when we're talking about for human consumption. The molecule was discovered here in Houston, so that's where I'm based, at Rice University in 1985. The three scientists who discovered the molecule actually won the Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1996, so kind of short 11 years from discovery to being awarded the Nobel Prize. They won the Nobel Prize because the molecule, and let's just talk about the unique shape of the molecule. That's part of the reason they won the Nobel Prize. The molecule looks like a soccer ball. If you imagine a soccer ball, you guys, I think, call it a football. Here in the States, we incorrectly call it a soccer ball, but that's all right. So if you imagine a football, the lines on the football represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. You have the spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. It was the first closed cage molecule ever discovered, right? So that's already fantastic. It's the third form of carbon, right? So you're familiar with diamond, you're familiar with graphite, and now there's a whole collection of molecules called fullerenes. They were named after a very famous futurist named Bucky Fuller, who was kind of responsible for bringing the geodesic dome to prominence. So if you've ever seen a dome here in the States, it's often at beaches. You'll see houses that are domes, or go to Epcot Center. Those are geodesic domes, and Buckminster Fuller made those popular. He didn't invent them, but certainly brought them to prominence. And so in homage to Bucky Fuller, they actually called this whole collection of molecules fullerenes. Most abundant of them is that football-shaped molecule. It has 60 carbon atoms. So in terms of chemistry, it's C60, carbon 60. Some of the biohackers out there may have heard of this. But in terms of actual consumption, we call it ESS60. So not only was it spectacular because of this kind of closed cage aspect, the first closed cage molecule, the way I describe it is it performs as well or better than the current best material in almost every application. So it makes better inks, better batteries, better tires, better photocells. And all of these things are things that wouldn't put me on a biohacking podcast, right? Like ink, batteries, tires, photocells.
I was going to say.
Biohackers are pretty crazy, but they're usually not going, hey, see that battery over there? I'm sure there's something in that battery that I should be taking on a daily basis. I just need to figure out what it is. So it actually was just for industrial purposes. And I started a lab with my business partner in 1991, manufacturing and selling this molecule to research institutions around the world. And so you think about it, discovered in 85 and 91, we actually start manufacturing and distributing. In 96, they win the Nobel Prize. So we're right in the thick of things. We're here in the Houston area. And in fact, our lab provided the material to the next kind of thing that really helps transition it into kind of health and biohacking. But first, the story takes a little turn for the worst. They thought that football, soccer ball shaped molecule would be toxic, just because one of the shapes on the exterior of the ball is reminiscent of benzene. Now, benzene is ubiquitous in our society. Like, we do not have modern society without the benzene ring. People might have heard that phrase, the benzene ring. And just to give you an example, if you look around wherever you're at and just imagine everything that is plastic not existing, right? We don't have that benzene is one of the key structures in plastics and many detergents. In medicines like aspirin has the benzene ring in it. So really important for modern society. But on its own, the benzene ring is known to be toxic and known to be carcinogenic. So because that same shape exists on the ESS60 molecule, they thought it would be toxic. They put it in a toxicity study. And again, my lab provided the material were mentioned in this original study. And instead of being toxic, the test subject that they gave it to, in this case, it was Wistar rats, lived 90% longer than the control group. So the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, peer-reviewed published research, the kind of research that you would hang your hat on, is because of this football, soccer ball shaped molecule. And again, we call it ESS60 if you're going to be consuming it.
That's a significant statistic, right? So what was it specifically about the molecule that contributed to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Your first thought is, okay, great. Well, if you're a biohacker, by the way, I wasn't at the time, but if you're a biohacker, your first thought is, how do I get that stuff that normally goes into batteries into my body? Because those rats live longer, right? So really our phone, that study was released in 2012, mid-2013, we started getting phone calls. And I'll just continue on that path because it's an interesting journey for my business partner and I. So imagine in mid-2013, we start getting phone calls and people are like, hey, how much of this stuff should I be consuming? And my business partner and I were conservative nanomaterial scientists. We're like, wait a minute, you're asking how much of this powder, black powder, that we sell to research institutions around the world to put into ink, batteries, tires, and photocells, how much of that should you be consuming? Yeah, we're going to go with zero, right? We actually added not for human consumption to our labeling in mid-2013. So you think from 1991 all the way till 2013, we don't have the phrase not for human consumption because, again, people, if they were going to assume anything relative to consumption, their assumption would be that it's toxic. Now, at the point that we're putting not for human consumption on the labeling, the literature was clear. This stuff is safe, right? So every way that they gave it to any sort of animal model, whether it was inhalation, whether it was injection, whether it was consumption, every possible way, if it was processed safely, again, we call that ESS60, then it was actually known to not be toxic. And in fact, in this study, instead of being toxic, the test subjects lived 90% longer than the control group. But again, conservative nanomaterial scientists were like, okay, you're not going to consume this. This is our recommendation. Don't consume this. And from mid-2013 to the latter part of 2017, we would get 2 calls a week. And these would be these wacky, crazy biohackers. And I can say wacky now because I'm absolutely a biohacker. They would call us and they'd say things like, my hair, these amazing testimonials, right? My hair is growing back and it's the original color, and my grandpa who wouldn't give him the keys to the car is now lucid and he's driving again, or mowing the lawn, like just crazy, the craziest testimonials. And first, it was really kind of tough for us first, it's like, wait a minute, you just said your knee pain is gone? You mean the knee pain of your rat, because it literally says not for human consumption on the labeling. And they're like, oh, yeah, my rat. So if a 270-pound rat were to be consuming this daily, how much would a 270-pound rat be taking? Right? We're getting these amazing testimonials, and that was, I got to be honest, that was kind of a challenging time for my business partner and I. For one, we would get together quarterly and we'd say, do we want to get into the supplement, health supplement industry? And like, we'll just call it a challenged industry, right? From a quality perspective, from an ethics perspective, there are just so many challenges there. And our answer quarter after quarter after quarter was, no, we don't want to get into this industry. And in fact, in that time between 2013 and 2017, I found a peer-reviewed published paper where the researchers had purchased some supplements off the market, and the paper reported that 50% of the supplements they purchased on the market did not have in them what they said they had in them, right? And this is like night and day from us delivering commercial quantities of carbon nanomaterials to research institutions around the world to like, hey, this is our competition is going to sell garbage, right? Like basically. Or at a minimum, nothing with the scientific integrity of, hey, I wrote it on the label, that's actually what's in it, right? Like that was the industry that we were debating. And quarter after quarter, we decided not to do that. And then we're getting these amazing testimonials. And as scientists, you're kind of trained to ignore anecdotal results. But the reality is anecdotes are important. Like it's without those anecdotes. I mean, the way the scientific process works is you start with a hypothesis, and kind of interesting in our case, the hypothesis was that the ESS60 molecule would be toxic. And then you do a test and you find a result. You think back to, some of the greatest scientific discoveries. You think back to penicillin. It was an anecdotal observation that the bacteria was not growing in the petri dish where that fungus was, right? And to go like, okay, you don't ignore anecdotes. They're the foundation of many of the hypotheses that you have kind of moving forward. So we're getting these amazing testimonials. We're getting together every quarter and kind of saying we don't want to get into this industry. And then really at the latter part of 2017, a guy with a big YouTube following started sharing all the benefits he was taking it on a daily basis. And our phone went from 2 calls a week to 10 calls a week. 10 calls a day. And so that's when my business partner and I are like, okay, so if what we know about the supplement market is true, that people are going to get into this market and they're going to do a bad job. Like in best case scenario, they're not going to be malicious. They're just going to do a bad job. We've got the lab. We've been working with this material since 1991. Let's get into this industry just for the sake of making sure that people at least take our product, are safe and getting a high quality product. And so latter part of 2017, early part of 2018, we started getting into the business and selling it as a health supplement. Now, that's a big, long loop to get back to why did these test subjects live longer? Why were we getting testimonials literally from head to toe? Like I've got, I already mentioned kind of hair growing long. By the way, let me just throw out, the FDA has not evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease. Anecdotes that I will share I have a direct path to the people. I don't just, even if my business partner heard it from somebody and shares it with me, I'll share you kind of the chain of custody of a testimonial. And probably best just to assume this won't happen for you. Look at the research, listen to the other things that we're talking about. The testimonials are just to give you some perspective on what might be going on here. Certainly no guarantees that this is what's going on. So we're getting these amazing, so head to toe, we've got hair growing in faster, growing in original color. There is literally a toe testimonial. An influencer that we've worked with had his big toe bitten by a crab when he was like 5 years old, split his toenail, and it was split until he was 65 after he started taking our product, and it finally healed, right? So we literally have head-to-toe testimonials. So one of my first jobs is, what's going on here? Like, why did these rats live longer? And so when you think about how the medical community thinks about longevity, they tend to think of it as an aging, as an oxidation and an inflammation process, right? And we incidentally check both of those boxes. So we'll start with we'll start with an antioxidant, and I'll end up coming back to it because the current theory is even more powerful. So as an antioxidant, there's ad hoc studies out on the web that show our product to be 172 times more powerful than vitamin C. There's peer-reviewed published research that shows it to be 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. And vitamin C is the go-to. Like, I think I've got some sniffles, vitamin C, I've got a cold, whatever is going on. Like, you just take more vitamin C, drink some orange juice. So definitely checking that box. When it comes to inflammation, we have to be very specific in what the FDA will allow us to say. We are allowed to say that we address inflammation, at least inflammation caused by exercise, right? So we've all gone for a long walk. We've all kind of had a tough workout, and the next day felt that inflammation in our body. Our product can and does address that. What we can't claim is any other types of inflammation. So these chronic types of inflammation are very specifically related with the diseases of aging. So these are going to be things like arthritis, cardiovascular disease, cancers, Alzheimer's. And so there's just a lot more research that needs to be done in order to start talking about those types of inflammation. So we check both of those boxes. I will wrap up kind of inflammation saying that our product fit, with an olive oil base, right? So you have this ESS60 molecule with 60 carbon atoms. It's dissolved in olive oil, typically olive oil, avocado oil, or MCT oil. Those are the three oils that we have. And the olive oil product fits perfectly in with an anti-inflammatory diet, right? That's a diet associated with the blue zones. Blue zones are people who tend to live longer, people who tend to have reduced incidences of stroke and reduced incidences of heart attack. So we definitely fit in that type of diet. Now, I know this feels like it's getting drawn out. There's one last little piece, and this is the most recent theory, and we call it the BOSS theory, buffering oxidative stress system. So we say that the ESS60 molecule is the boss, and this is what we mean by that. We know from peer-reviewed published research that the ESS60 molecule gets into the mitochondria. And we also know, as I've mentioned already, that it is a great antioxidant. In fact, all the way back in the 90s when it was originally discovered, it was very clear that the ESS60 molecule could hold up to 6 negatively charged particles, right? So when you start thinking about negatively charged particles, you often start thinking about being able to manage reactive oxygen species, and part of the reason that it's a great antioxidant. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. The mitochondria, right, like we're biohackers, everybody knows what mitochondria is the powerhouse of every cell. Every cell in your body has between 50 and 5,000 mitochondria in it, except for nerve cells and brain cells, which have 2 million mitochondria in them, right? So they're very energy intensive. The mitochondria is really the organelle in cells responsible for taking really kind of the food that's been pushed into your bloodstream and turn that into ATP, the energy source that your cells need in order to be a liver cell, heart cell, skin cell, neuron, whatever it is. And one of the challenges, just like any power source, there are negative byproducts, right? So a car going down the road has exhaust. A power plant is going to have that smokestack with exhaust coming out of it. In the case of in the case of mitochondria, the negative byproduct is reactive oxygen species, ROSs. And these are negatively charged particles. And typically in the mitochondria, they're managed with glutathione and melatonin. Those are the great internal to mitochondria antioxidants. But we know that some parts of our body are going to get depleted of things sometimes, especially when you're pushing. So intense exercise or maybe a large meal is causing you to do a lot more processing than normal. And now your glutathione and melatonin is kind of used up in your mitochondria. That's when those reactive oxygen species run around and do that oxidative damage that the medical community kind of associates with aging. So where this ESS60 molecule in, this soccer ball, football-shaped molecule fits in, again, we know from peer-reviewed published research, it gets into the mitochondria, and we know it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles. So I've got kind of this fun analogy. It's Mardi Gras, right? And you're in New Orleans, and it's Bourbon Street, and Mardi Gras is over, and you have these drunk reactive oxygen species tearing up Bourbon Street, right? Breaking car windows and shop windows and tearing down light poles. They're really aggressive, I guess. And the police are the glutathione and the melatonin. And what they do is they come in and they handcuff themselves to these reactive oxygen species and get them off of Bourbon Street. When they get overwhelmed, well, what does the New Orleans police do? They throw these reactive oxygen species into a paddy wagon. So you can imagine, I mean, it's fun to imagine that they're getting shoved into the interior of the football-shaped molecule, right, the spherical molecule, but that's not what happens. It just gets attached to the exterior. So the carbon-carbon double bonds allow for, again, up to 6 negatively charged particles. So now they're being held by this ESS60 molecule. Now they can't do any damage to Bourbon Street, to your cells, to get outside of your cells. They can't do any damage outside of your cells. And when that mitochondria replenishes the police, the glutathione or the melatonin, they handcuff themselves to those attached reactive oxygen species and then get them off of Bourbon Street. And so that's why we say that this ESS60 molecule is the boss.
Sounds like a really powerful supplement. And I know that I brought some back with me from the States, actually, and I had a friend visiting from New Zealand and he was unwell. And I said, hey, you got to take this stuff. It's really good. Within a day, he was better. It just worked so quickly for him.
That's ultimately how I got my wife to try the product. You know, like your significant other, your spouse, whatever, like, what do you know about biohacking? What do you know about whatever? Even if it's your area of expertise. I actually was working with a pediatrician one time. He shared with me that he, with his wife, had another pediatrician friend of theirs with his wife, and they were like, the wives could not ask them questions about pediatrics, right? They had to call their buddy because they just weren't like your pediatric doctor, husband or wife. Like, you just don't listen to, like, you know how they are in real life, right? They're real people. And then you're leaning on them for expertise. So it took me a long time to get my wife to try the product. And it really was like, I think, a bout of flu or something. And I like shoved that spoon of ESS60 and olive oil into her mouth, and she was better the next day. And now she's actually a better, and you met her, like, I think you met her at the booth, right?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
At the biohacking conference. She's a significantly better salesperson than I'll ever be. But yeah, that can take a while to make that happen.
So it seems like you have become the accidental entrepreneur. Walk us through your journey to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think it might be better to describe me as a very intentional entrepreneur, but an accidental carbon nanomaterial scientist, an accidental health supplement guy, an accidental kind of longevity expert. And I've written this story in my book, Live Longer and Better. Very fortunate. My co-author is a 2-time New York Times #1 bestseller. So it's monumentally, I will say, challenging to get on the New York Times bestselling list. To get to #1 is like asymptotically, like exponentially harder. And so he's done it twice. So I was very lucky to be able to work with Dr. Corsi. And in the book, I kind of describe, and we'll give links like where to find the book and everything. In the book, I describe how when I was very young, probably about 14, and I have 14-year-old twins now. So like right at this age, I had on my wall a picture of a bright red Lamborghini Countach, and the doors were open, and this is a thing that I was gonna have somehow. And way back then, there's no internet, and today you're like, how would I own a supercar, right? And you would get mostly a bunch of people standing in front of their rented supercars telling you how to own a supercar, but you would still find the right answers. And actually, I found very similar answers today as I was writing the book as I did way back then. I ended up back then, I think I found like a Motor Trend magazine, and it was like, how do you own a Lamborghini Countach? And it said, if you want a Lamborghini Countach, you should become a neurosurgeon. If you want more than one Lamborghini Countach, you should become an entrepreneur. I'm a 14-year-old kid. I don't know what it takes to be an entrepreneur, but more than one of my dream cars sounds really nice, right? Sounds really fantastic. And so in that moment, I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. Didn't know what I was going to do. Like, I actually, in the book, I talk about an idea of kind of combining pizza delivery with movie delivery, which obviously wouldn't have lasted long. Blockbuster's out of business. And I do remember very specifically my brother saying it was a dumb idea, but I think that was just my brother. So I literally had no idea. And in my family, it was always understood you were going to college. We actually literally didn't do any preparation. I've got nephews now who are sophomores and juniors who in high school who know where they're going to college. That was not the case with my brother and I. We graduated from high school and then like, where are we going? It turns out that at the time, my dad was transitioning to live in Houston and work in Houston, my parents. And so I just went to the University of Houston. Like, that was the thing that we ended up doing. Now, in the book, I point out, what does somebody who wants to potentially open a pizza and movie delivery business study in college? And today you might say entrepreneurship, right? I did some research. There's hundreds of entrepreneurship programs. There's thousands of classes right now. Back then, when I was going to college, there were literally only 3 colleges, like 3 courses of all the colleges in the United States that had entrepreneurship programs. But I don't even know that that's what I would have done, because my logic was, what's the fastest way to the most lucrative career where I could then save money and invest in my business? I love science. I love math. And so I studied mechanical engineering. And then what went wrong with my plan, which was actually better, is it wasn't that I got a job as an engineer, got a good salary and invested that salary in a business. I actually started the business before I left school. And that's where my business partner, Robert Wong, was working at the Texas Center for Superconductivity. So that's an organization that's housed on the University of Houston campus. And he was separating these fullerenic materials. I told you there's a whole collection. You got diamond, graphite, and this whole collection of molecules. The most abundant is carbon-60. The next is carbon-70, 76, 84. And he was isolating them, because I told you the molecule performs as well or better than the current best material. It is, in fact, superconducting in the right conditions. So really, that's what was going on. So one day, his professor, Dr. Paul Chu, who's pretty famous in the superconductivity world, came in and said, hey, you guys are young kids, young college kids. This material is selling for $6,000 a gram. You should go start a business. And my business partner, Robert, is from an entrepreneurial background and didn't even really do the back of the napkin calculation was probably $6,000 per gram. Start this business, right? And so he started it with one of his lab buddies. And they brought me in studying engineering to help with drawings, to help with the design of the actual manufacturing equipment. I was supposed to go away. What turned out is the other guy went away. He did more fun college things, and I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur, so I couldn't have been happier than to be doing that, getting this business off the ground, building the equipment, which is still the most effective way to manufacture fullerenes on the planet, that design, and we still use it to this day. So we did that back when I was 19 and still in college. So that now I'm a carbon nanomaterial scientist, and then you kind of know the story of the test subjects living 90% longer. So now we're in the health space. And then really the right thing to do in my mind is understand, one, how important the discovery is, right? This 90% extension of life. What are the other options out there? and then I'm kind of thrown into this biohacking world. And I ended up putting together a longevity summit called Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity, Live Beyond the Norms. And I interviewed 55 experts in longevity, including Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, Dr. Stephen Gundry, and another 52 other experts. And so now working on another book, and I'm going to cement it in this, not just biohacking, I would say in biohacking and longevity space. And so I would say all of that stuff is accidental. The entrepreneurship was the one thing that was kind of concretely understood, even if I didn't know where that was going to take me.
Yeah, right. What were some of the biggest surprises from you, from the longevity summit, rather?
Yeah, that was, first off, that I accomplished it.
No easy feat, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have a podcast, you're interviewing people. Like, I was 15 minutes late. I apologize. I messed up with that, right? And so the guests are a pain. And frustrating. And then I ended up with some pretty massive guests. In fact, I was working with this company, Health Means. They helped me put this summit together. And when we had our first meeting, they were like, okay, so you're going to need to interview like 35 to 40 experts. And in my head, I was like, I think I can do 25, and hopefully they will not be that angry with me. and I ended up interviewing 55. I did all the interviews in about 2 months. I'll never forget the Thanksgiving weekend of last year. It's only 3 days here in the States, and I did 9 interviews that week, right? So I was in on the weekends. I try very hard not to work on weekends and spend time with family, but I was in on the weekends preparing for those interviews, because they're, at 3 interviews a day, there's no time to prepare for these interviews. Like, they have to be pre-prepared. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was a lot of work. Now, I think I went into it trying to identify, I kind of call it 2 silver bullets, right? One of them, the bullet is about a pill size. So was there a pill, a silver bullet pill that you could take and now you would live for longer or forever or whatever? I did not find that one. And then the other is the silver bullet that might kill you. And I think in terms of longevity, I feel like I certainly encountered that. And that was a bit of a surprise. And what it turns out to be is, in my mind, I had 2 interviews with stem cell experts. One was Christian Drapeau. His company is Stem Regen. Super knowledgeable. He was the lead sponsor at the biohacking conference.
That's right.
I got to interview with him there, and he was actually obviously interviewed on my longevity summit. And then the other one was Dr. Joy Kong, who's just amazing. She's awesome. I was just emailing her today. And in those conversations, it just became clear to me that everything in our body is regenerated. Like, we have a very clear picture, I think, that our skin cells slough off at some millions a day, and you're like, wow, that's a lot, but you still have no concept of how much that is. But they get replenished, right? Well, what's replenishing them? Is it just actual skin cells dividing, or like what's going on there? And then a lesser picture, like every muscle cell in your body is replaced every 3 months, right? And what's driving that? And it's stem cells, right? Stem cells, and they're typically released from your red bone marrow, are the repair mechanisms of your body, the replenishment mechanisms of your body. And it turns out that red bone marrow shrinks over time, shrinks as we get older. And even with Jean Clement, if I'm saying that right, the oldest lived woman, 122 years old, it was kind of identified that all of her cells came from one stem cell line, right? So she just had one line left. And then, once your stem cells are over, imagine you've got a car and there's no way to put in gas, replace the oil, like there's nothing you can do. Eventually it stops. And so that's kind of the silver bullet. Now, there's all sorts of other things that we do have to address before that even becomes the main thing to manage. And I think there's actually ways to manage it, because we can actually grow stem cells outside of our body, not allowed legally to do that in the United States, or I think you can grow them, but you can't re-inject them. You can go outside of the country to do that. So maybe there is some sort of, kind of dialysis process that could continue with these stem cells. But that was some of the surprise for me.
Yeah, that's huge, because when we're looking at longevity, there are so many options out there for people, and it's sometimes hard to kind of navigate through the weeds in terms of what does work and what doesn't work, what do you think is the biggest limiting factor for living longer that came out of the summit?
Yeah. So I think one, in terms of kind of broad limiting factors, potentially the red bone marrow. But I'll throw in this other data point. It was kind of neat, kind of interesting that came out of it. So I literally asked every expert 3 questions. And one of the questions was the 3 same questions, lots more questions in general. One of the questions was, how long do you intend to live? Right.
Yeah.
The other one was, how long can humans live? And the other one was 2 to 3 was, let's say, habits, mindsets, processes, let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts, that you would share for longevity and or a long health span. And so we aggregated all the data, and 33.3% of them mentioned mindset. And then 54% mentioned exercise, 54% mentioned nutrition, and then 44 mentioned mindset, and then 44% mentioned sleep, right? So 33 mindset, 54 exercise, 54% mentioned nutrition, 44 mentioned sleep percent. And at first, I thought they got it wrong. And I thought they got it wrong for this reason, which is we all know how important sleep is, right? Like sleep is just good for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And the fact that they had sleep above mindset, like 10 percentage points above mindset, I thought that they got it wrong. And then it took me a while, but I was thinking about this whole process, and I was thinking about what really matters. And I think they got it wrong for the opposite of my initial thought. I think mindset is the big key thing, because if you understand that you need to exercise more and you don't have the mindset to do it, or you need to have more movement and you don't have the mindset to do it, it's not going to happen. If you know that you need to eat better, right, or eat more protein, which I'm full of protein. It's just amazing how much protein I'm eating. But you don't have the mindset to take that step, to take that action, it's not going to happen. And even as it relates to sleep, if you know that things you need to do to get to sleep are like, put your electronic device away, don't get exposure to blue light, make sure you're going to sleep at the same time, make sure you're waking up at the same time. If you don't have the mindset, so I believe that mindset is the most important thing for all of these when you really break it down.
Yeah, I totally agree on that one, actually. How long do you think humans will or can live, and why?
So for me, that is a 2-part answer, right? It's where we sit today, and I think the number is probably 120, 125, right? And that's literally where we sit today. We've got, Jean Clement, she lived out to 122. And, even though the average lifespan has declined minutely, but declined for the first time in really eons in the last years, even pre-COVID, it declined for like 2 years in a row. I think that we're, just the smaller scientific adjustments that we're making will get us to 122, 125. I think ultimately, if you read Dr. David Sinclair's book, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, he makes the case that we could be living forever, right? And if let's just leave out, can we upload our brains into a computer? We'll just leave that out. That's a whole fascinating discussion. But other than, extreme tragedies, there's a thing called the longevity escape velocity, right? And the concept is, when the medical community, every day that passes, is extending life for 1.1 days, right? At that point, there really should be no one who dies of natural causes, right? There really should be the point where there will be, I believe that this point will happen, where there will be a last person to die of natural causes. And it will really suck to be that person. I mean, depending on how you feel, maybe that person doesn't even know, right? But you don't want to, I would prefer to not be that person. I'd prefer to be on the other side of the finish line relative to that person. And so I think that we're going to get to that point. And then, who knows what's going to happen with computer technology. I would at this point say, I don't think we're uploading our brains so interestingly, in my lifetime, according to my first answer, but my lifetime could be very, very long, potentially infinite. And so then maybe we are able to upload our brains. And so that's the different answers. But one piece of data that I'll give, so some people are just going to think he's crazy, Dr. David Sinclair is crazy. Anybody who thinks that we're going to live, Dave Asprey, I think is targeted 180 or shared targeting 180. By the way, when I interviewed him on my longevity summit and asked him that question, his answer was significantly more esoteric. He was like, I'm going to live until I'm content, and then I'm going to go in a cave, and I'm going to start meditating, and I'm going to leave my body and travel the universe. Which was not the answer I was expecting.
No, not at all.
But the data point that I think is really important to this, if you start saying, you guys are crazy. In 1950, medical information doubled every 50 years, every 50 years. Today, medical information doubles every 73 days. So what doubling the medical information every 73 days means is that by the end of this year, there'll be 16 times more information, medical information, than there was prior to it. Now, this is kind of taken in terms of white papers and the research that goes into white papers. And so, is it all valuable and brand new cutting edge research? No. But it's going to be 16 times as much information. And I don't think, well, in reality, that's a relatively new number, right? 73 days. That doesn't take into consideration the real impact of AI. And I think the real impact of AI is going to be less about churning out more papers, right? So then we've got more research. I think it's going to be more about having kind of the biological systems uploaded into these models. I'll say language models, but these kind of intelligence models. And then it being able to tell us what research we should even be doing, right? If we could just only do the research that is going to add the most value, I think that's where AI is going to add value. So I don't know that it means AI is going to get us, from adding 16 times as much information in this year. It's just going to make sure that 16 times as much information is going to be significantly more valuable than the previous set of information. And I think it's those two things together that really make me very confident in saying, whatever it is that you think or could even be possible with human physiology, with human biology, is going to happen a lot faster than we think.
Yeah, there's some really exciting times ahead, I think, based on that analogy for sure, and how AI can potentially influence this space. Biohacking is turning into a billions of dollar industry, right? How do you see longevity and biohacking intertwined?
I think so. I ended up interviewing Natalie Needham, who's amazing, and not only is she amazing just in general, kind of in the biohacking space, certainly kind of with a particular expertise in the peptide space. She also helped me. I think I did last I counted. She helped me get 9 interviews for my longevity summit. Right, so I couldn't be more appreciative to her. And as we were talking about biohacking, I asked the question, do you have to biohack for longevity? And we went back and forth. And I think what we ultimately said is, listen, if you're living in a pretty rural place, right, where you don't have exposure to as many of the things that impact our health, impact our biology, right? So less EMF radiation, less noise pollution, less pollution in general, less stress. If you're rural, maybe you don't need biohacking to really kind of hone in on longevity. But if you're in an urban setting, you're just negatively impacted day in and day out by so many things that we think biohacking is actually something that's necessary for longevity. And I think one potential kind of tweak between biohacking and longevity is that biohacking is really about optimizing performance today, right? So if I've got a knee pain, how do I take it? Maybe it's with some peptide injections. If I've got kind of brain fog, how do I manage that? And my product tends to help with that. If I'm not sleeping well, which we all know is important for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being, then how do I manage that? Again, my product happens to manage with that. We could probably talk about some of the kind of feedback that we do get from our customers. But so biohacking, I think, is about that kind of sense of immediacy and having a grander picture for the longevity. I think if you biohack properly and you're doing it well, you're going to end up at least living longer, healthier, if not living longer, and in fact, probably living longer. So I think that's where they might kind of separate, which is biohacking's focus now, longevity. Maybe I give up a little bit of really everything I listed is important for both biohacking and longevity, but I might be giving up a little bit of productivity, right? Because I'm not pushing as hard on caffeine or nicotine or whatever, but that ends up extending my life for longevity.
So in your view, what are the most promising areas of research today in the field of longevity and health span extension?
And you think about longevity and health span. I just interviewed Dr. Robert Lufkin, who wrote the book, The Lies I Taught in Medical School, which is such a controversial title. And one of the things he's talking about medicine 3.0, even Peter Attia, I'm almost done with his book, talking about medicine 3.0, where you're looking more holistically and you're looking at what medicine is currently really good at doing is taking acute insults and making sure you don't die, right? The problem is that when you look at, when I was talking with Dr. Lufkin, he ended up being diagnosed with 4 of the classic diseases of aging. And as he's going down a path where he might end up on insulin, insulin protects you from the immediate damage of the extra sugar in your bloodstream, but it doesn't protect you from the fact that your body needs that help, right? So you're still going down the bad path that diabetes entails. And if you were to fix that, and in his case, with diet and lifestyle changes, he fixed all 4. Literally each one of them, he was given a prescription, and they were forever prescriptions, right? We've got forever chemicals. These were forever prescriptions. As long as you're alive, you're going to have to keep taking these. And through dietary and lifestyle changes, he got off of all those. So there's a phrase called deprescribed. He was deprescribed from those. And what that means is he's not incurring the insults, the damage from diabetes. He's actually cured it. So he's not getting those damages. He doesn't need insulin to manage it because it's a managing, not a cure. And so even managing it, you're still enduring the damage. Hopefully I'm doing a good job of explaining that. And so I think this one transition into almost universally with the people that I interviewed from the Longevity Summit and that are coming out on my podcast, which just launched about a month ago. I'm real excited about that. It's actually a top 10 alternative health podcast, so I'm excited about that. So what came out of it is just how important nutrition is. If you talk to Dr. Stephen Gundry, even if you don't subscribe to kind of his lectin alarmism, the reality is he's seeing patients 6 days a week still. And what he shared was that every 100% of his patients, whether they thought they were wheat-free or not, had wheat antibodies in their blood system, right? And what that means is basically different proteins from wheat had gotten into the bloodstream and the body was fighting them, right? As if they were a foreign body, because they are a foreign body. And so that was one of the kind of first things that he addresses. And that can be addressed over time with dietary changes. And so I think it's this shift to medicine 3.0. That's what's really exciting to let's break down these diseases of aging and stop just trying to put Band-Aids on them. And let's really address them with the right solutions, which are dietary and lifestyle changes. By the way, so many people just want to take a pill and be done with it, but that's usually not the best solution.
It's a good segue actually into my next question. I attended the longevity conference that focused on supplements at the National University of Singapore earlier this year. And there was some fairly robust discussion around whether supplements should be better regulated. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can share this. So as an accidental health supplement guy, and kind of the lead scientist, one of my responsibilities, what is for me and the company to understand what are our responsibilities to the public and what do those responsibilities look like in the eyes of the FDA here in the States, right? Federal Drug Administration, or food, I think it's Food and Drug Administration. So I'm looking at the FDA website and I found this particular phrase and I literally took a screenshot because I thought, this is not going to exist tomorrow. This is so surprising. This is not what people think is going on. And it said that you do not have to prove that a supplement is safe before you put it on the market. And that just sounds terrifying, right? Like absolutely unbelievably terrifying. But the reality is, if you decide, so Azra decides she's going to make a supplement and it's 10% vitamin D and 90% vitamin C. By the way, one's oil soluble, one's water soluble, maybe not the greatest supplement to put together. But I decide the opposite, 10% vitamin C and 90% vitamin D. We have, in fact, made different supplements. And so there's an infinite number of supplements that you can make, and there is no way that the FDA is going to be able to approve these before they go on the market. So their solution is, it is our federal responsibility to report any serious adverse side effects that our customers report to us to the FDA. Now, if we have somebody who has a serious adverse side effect, and we report it to the FDA, which we would, by the way, we haven't had to, but we would, that doesn't mean the FDA is going to say, hey, you stop it. That just means, hey, because everybody is in and run, and maybe they were taking other things, and what other things are potentially kind of coexist as a problem in a particular case, but that is your responsibility. So I think there's no way to fund the FDA at a level that would actually, such that the FDA would be able to execute the way people think that they do execute. I would like to see some more oversight. I just don't know how you fund it in the current environment. And so what the FDA is constantly looking for is, where are we having serious problems, and then shutting them down.
I think one of the other considerations also is that there's lots of research that has been done on specific ingredients like vitamin D and the benefits in vitamin C. And so whether that's a contributing factor in terms of the decision making around whether something should be regulated or not, there is that evidence in terms of those individual ingredients. I suppose the question then would be asked as to, well, how do they interact with each other, and are there any negative side effects as a result of that? And that's the more pointed consideration.
Well, and you could even have that they have a negative side effect with somebody with a certain biology.
Yeah.
Right? And we're kind of aware of biologies that support vitamin D production, and others that don't support vitamin D. I mean, just skin tone can produce more or less vitamin D. And so then you're like, okay, well, this supplement and this collection of people could be problematic, and then this other collection of people could be beneficial. And so it really is, I think that's one of the things that's going to come out and is coming out in kind of medicine 3.0, is that there really is a lot of variability that we need to take in consideration. And that awareness has really been driven by, us finally sequencing DNA and finally being able to look at DNA and understand the positive and negative impacts that DNA has on our physiology, on how we live in the current world.
Yeah, I think that bioindividuality is a big factor in terms of that, and certainly out of that longevity that longevity conference that I attended, one of the focuses that they felt was going to be, I suppose, growing in the future was around personalized medicine. And so, that talks to the point that you were referring to. What advice would you give to someone who is interested in optimizing their health and longevity, but is unsure about where to start?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I like what Dr. Tom O'Brien said. So again, he was on my longevity summit, and he says in his book, he wrote the book, The Autoimmune Fix, where, he and his wife had fertility issues, fixed those, and then he started fixing those for fertility issues for other couples, and then that just expanded. And a lot of it is really getting gluten out of the diet, really getting wheat out of the diet. That was a lot of what really helped. And if you go back, if you look at the AIP, the autoimmune protocol, which is not really a diet, it's just a process for figuring out what causes inflammation in your body, what causes you not to feel well. Dr. Tom O'Brien said you should be spending 1 hour a week. And he kind of, in his case and his examples, like, as the man of the house, you need to let your family know that 1 hour a week, if that's 1 hour on Sunday, you're checking out and you're reading for an hour to understand health, right? And the spouse probably should be doing the same thing. And then like trying to get your kids, and I have 14-year-old twins. I don't think I wouldn't even try yet with them. But so to spend an hour understanding it, and then do simple things. There are a lot of things. In fact, Tim Gray, he's the founder of Health Optimization Summit in the UK, and he did a presentation at, it was, I think, Biohacker Expo, and that was in Orlando. And it was like, here's all the free things you can do, right? So get plastics out of your meal. So now, and I was like, I cook with plastic. So now I don't cook with plastic. I cook with wood. Get the Teflon. Don't be cooking with Teflon. Get some exposure to the sun. Don't be taking fluoride, because fluoride is known to be detrimental to your cognition. There's just so many free things you do. Get grounding, get some exposure to the sun in the morning, get some exposure to the sun in the evening. There are so many things that you can do that are free. Maybe some of it, and I've had this conversation with a couple of other biohackers, where you tend to go outside and you tend to go for a walk, but you don't even necessarily realize that's a biohack, right? Like, get your shoes off and walk in the grass and get some grounding done. There are so many things that you can do. I think the most relevant thing that you should be cognizant of is what you're eating, right? And to eat whole foods, to not be on the SAD, right, standard American diet, is probably the best thing you can do. When I talk to these experts who are solving extremely complicated problems for people, Dr. Gundry, Dr. Tom O'Brien, I got to meet Will Cole at the biohacking conference. They're solving these with lifestyle and nutrition adjustments. And sometimes adjustments may not even be the right word, like massive changes in nutrition. So be mindful of that. Also get exercise. Be mindful of, you have to maintain muscle mass as you age, because muscle mass correlates with death really well. So no muscle mass, no living. Lots of muscle mass, more likely to be living, right? And so make sure you're getting enough protein to grow muscle, and make sure that you're doing resistance training. I believe in kind of the 4 types of exercise, which are the resistance training, the VO2 max training, balance training, and flexibility training. And so there's a lot of things that you can do that are relatively free, right? Like sometimes diet, getting into, stop buying TV dinners and actually, buying, in my case, lean turkey meat and, sweet potatoes. Like, that can be a little bit more expensive if you're going for kind of the right cuts of meat. Sweet potatoes, not so much. Go organic. I think there's just a lot of things that aren't that expensive that just take the right mindset. I postponed cooking my own meals and weighing each of my meals for so long, and now I do it on a daily basis, and I just don't even think about it. Like, I want to be getting enough protein because I want to have the muscle mass to, ensure a longer health span and longevity.
Great advice. And I think Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is doing a great job about getting the message out there around protein as well. She's awesome, and certainly around strength training as well, in particular for women in my age group. How do you balance the pursuit of scientific rigor with the growing interest in alternative health practices and biohacking, do you think?
Well, I think, so for me, it's a little easier, and probably for you too, right? We're not in a Tom O'Brien situation. Like, if I only spend an hour doing kind of research in biohacking and health and longevity, I'm on vacation. I'm not working. Like, that, my job, I'm in a very blessed position where it's my job to understand these things. So I don't think you want to get rid of scientific rigor. There are some situations where we have to find people that we trust, right? Whose scientific rigor that we do trust, and lean on them. And then if you just get, an uncomfortable feeling, then dig into the research that they're presenting as driving their decisions. I actually was supposed to interview Sim Land this week. He's a biohacker out of Estonia, just fascinating. And he just wrote a book called The Longevity Leap. It's not out yet. So I was excited to get a hold of it early. And it's just so much data. I mean, he has 7,700 references in this document. And you have a conversation with him. I was on his podcast some years ago. You have a conversation with him like, this is a smart guy digging deep into the information and then referencing it in his books, like there's probably a lot of value in that. And that's what I tend to lean on. And then that'll drive me to, maybe check out a couple of those 7,700 references, especially if they don't coincide with my current belief system. So I think I think that's about understanding how a person with scientific rigor speaks. Like if you want the shortcut, spend some time understanding, like, this sounds very scientific, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed published papers that he or she is leaning on, and then you can follow what they're saying pretty well. I think Dr. Susan Kaufman is another. I love her analytical approach to kind of longevity. What are the right supplements you should be taking? What are the lifestyle modifications?
Looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future of longevity research and its implications for society?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we achieve longevity escape velocity, and that we've got this option to the only way that you get removed from this earth is because some horrible accident happens. That sounds horrible, but hopefully the intent is understood. That for me. So as we think about my product, right? My product extended the lives of test subjects, in this case Bristol rats, by 90%. And as I share that, I tend to get kind of two responses. Kind of the funny one is, if they're New Yorkers, they're like, why would we want a rat to live 90% longer? Chris, you're an evil person. You need to bury this research and not share it with anyone. And then normal people are like, often their first response is, why would I want to live longer? And what I realized is, and by the way, the data from my longevity summit supports this, right? Because remember, I asked 55 experts in longevity, right? So their mindset is more open about living longer and healthier. And I asked them, how long do you intend to live? And how long can humans live? And only 3 gave the same number. Why would you believe humans can live to whatever, 150, and not want to get there yourself? Because you are just like everybody else currently on the planet and cannot separate living longer from living infirmed, right? Like living in a debilitated state. And nobody wants that. But if you change the question, you're like Azra, if you had the same mental capacity that you have today and you have the same physical capacity that you have today, would you then be interested in living longer? And the answer, for the most part, right? Even then, you still get, I've seen kind of some comments on videos that I've posted. It's like, yeah, with current society and the way the world is going, I don't know that I want to be around. Like, okay, I can get that, but then live longer and make a difference, right? Reinvent yourself in a way that living another 30, 40, 50 years really is going to be of value to you, and you can see and enjoy that value. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but
I think you did. And I think I agree with you that, if we do want to live well longer, and that's something that I want, but I only want to live well longer if I'm in good health, cognitively, physically, and that I'm giving some value back to society and contributing in another way. So reinventing yourself, the point that you've made, I think is a great one, because sure, maybe we get bored with life, maybe we get bored with our current jobs or whatever, but that doesn't stop you from being able to reinvent yourself. And I think it's a really valid point. What does it mean to you? This is my last question to you, and then I'll let you go. What does it mean to you to live well longer?
To live well longer. I'm going to give probably the most given answer in my longevity summit. And again, all of those are coming out on my podcast, the podcast title, Live Beyond the Norms. The answer that we got the most was just what you just gave, right? Like, I just want to be productive. I don't want to be a burden to my friends, family, or whoever's left taking care of me. And I think the quintessential example of how people want to live their life kind of healthy is like a candle, right? Where the candle burns brightly all the way to the end, and then it just snuffs out, right? So you're healthy and happy and connected and reinventing yourself regularly, and then you're done. I think the last time I read some stat, it said about 20% of our lives is in some sort of decline. And what I'm hoping can come out of like my book, Live Longer and Better, the podcast, Live Beyond the Norms, and future things I'm going to do, is to change the mindset that we can live more like that candle. We can live more not having this 20% in decline. I remember one of the guys I interviewed was like, my Uncle Joe, he went to the doctor, he used to smoke and drink a lot. And the doctor was like, listen, if you keep this up, you're going to knock 10 years off of your life. And Uncle Joe was like, is it going to be the last 10? Because I don't really care about the last 10. so to change that so that that last 10 is as productive as, not the first 10, because right, that's too little, but as we'll say as our 30s, I think that feels really exciting. And I'm excited about what's going to happen there. And my intent, hopefully, is to live forever, but at a minimum is to live like a candle.
I think that's something definitely to aspire to, for sure. So look, thanks so much for your time today, Chris. Really appreciate it. We will absolutely include the links to your books and to your podcast as well in the show notes. And great chatting with you. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Aja. Thank you so much. I'm glad we got to meet. I'm glad we were finally put this together. And I'm sure we'll see each other and meet again.
For sure. Thanks, Chris. Well, that's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And if you'd like to learn more about biohacking, go ahead and sign up on my website at www.biohack-her.com to get a free copy of my 5 top biohacks to get you kick-started. While you're there, you can also check out my blog page for more tips on biohacking. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on Apple, Spotify, and Google Play. Let us know if there's anyone you'd like us to talk to in particular, and we'll endeavour to get them on the podcast. Until next time, remember to live well longer.